So why don't you first take us back to what got you on this journey?
Find my way back to myself through finding my way back to my body, and the ripple effect was huge. It was so transformative, and it was because of that I thought, God, if this can be so transformative to me, surely it can be just as transformative to other people. And that's why I set up an event series we'll talk about it, momentarily, but called Sex Talk. Alex said something to me that shifted my mindset around my body in perpetuity and then around sex. She said, Emma, for as long as you are at war with your body, you will struggle to enjoy sex. You will struggle to enjoy sexual pleasure. Inundated with messages from women saying, I have this too. I've never acknowledged this, but I have an eating disorder, or I have an issue with my body, and I'm not able to orgasm, or an issue with sex. And I think at that point, something just clicked. And I was like, first of all, I'm not alone.
And do you believe in like love at first sight?
No. Not at all.
Welcome to the Intelligent Change podcast. Emma, it's so good to have you here.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. I'm so excited to do this.
And this is probably one of the most exciting podcasts that we'll have at Intelligent Change, all about sex.
Yay! Okay.
And I thought, who's the best person to speak about sex is Emma.
Thank you.
So, a little about you.
Yes.
You're a writer.
Yes.
You just wrapped up your first book.
Yes, my first book, fresh. I literally sent in the current draft. There's still loads of editing to do, but on Monday, 9 p.m. I'm a write, to the deadline person. So as soon as the library was about to kick me out, that's when I sent it to my editor. But yeah, it's called Pleasure, The Reclamation of My Body. It's out next year. And it is kind of memoir, really exploring my own relationship to my body and to sex and to pleasure. And then through my own story, really delving into our broader sex culture and how it fucks us up, and how we can really women specifically, find our ways back to our body and to pleasure.
This is so exciting. And I believe sex is one of the most important conversations to have that we don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And you were at our first Intelligent Change Summit where you hosted your sex talks.
Yes.
In person.
Yes. Oh my God, that feels so long ago now, which is wild. Yeah, that was what?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. God, and so much has changed.
Yeah, you hosted a conversation with Chloe McIntosh.
Yes, who's phenomenal.
Yeah, really cool. And you're phenomenal as well in regards to, as you said with your own book that you're going to be coming out with soon. Mm-hmm. What I love about you, and the reason why I want to sit down and have this conversation, is that as you'll talk to us about how you've written this book, but you give this exploration of yourself as a woman going on this journey of getting to know your body and yourself. And many people out there, even listening right now, are in the same place as you were. So why don't you first take us back to what got you on this journey, because you don't really have that background to be in the sex industry of sorts.
No, I used to work in the newsroom, Alex. I did not talk about sex. And I also didn't, I think people often assume that I grew up in a household where we were very open about sex. I tell my parents everything now. I mean, my parents are the first people who read my book. They've read it my dad is traumatized, fully traumatized. He is proud because he's a writer. Both my parents are writers.
Yes.
So he's proud from a kind of technical perspective. He's like, it's a brilliant book and it's so well written, but I am traumatized by these stories. So really spare thought for my parents. I did not grow up in a household where we talked about sex. I did not grow up talking about sex. I did not grow up with a particularly good relationship to sex. I worked in the newsroom, I worked in politics. I was always interested in gender equality issues. I'd always done volunteering on feminist festivals and that sort of thing. So I was always interested in gender politics, but I worked in news and current affairs. I was really interested in politics. And I think I got to, how old was I? I was 28, it's about 5 years ago now. Age myself there. There's about 27, 28, and I'd left the newsroom a couple of years prior and started setting up my own media platforms. So always focused on politics, US election, like very political stuff. And I had a terrible relationship to sex. I didn't really enjoy it. I hadn't been able to orgasm since I had broken up with my long-term first love from like probably like 23 years old. So it'd been about 5 years, 6 years. And I didn't really think that much of it. I thought, I'm just broken. I don't really work in the way I'm supposed to, but I didn't think it was a kind of a big deal. I thought sex was one of those, there were people who liked sex, and there were people like me who it just wasn't really their thing. And I went to a dinner party one evening, and I sat around with a group of girls, and I didn't really talk about sex that much because I felt like it was this point of differentiation whereby everyone around me seemed to be having like, good to great sex, going on dates, feeling quite anxiety free when it came to their intimate life. People could go on a date and then be like, oh, I hooked up with him, I did this, or I did that with her, whatever. And I always kind of wondered, I was like, God, how do you feel so insouciant about it? How can you be so casual about intimacy? For me, it felt like it was so anxiety ridden. In part because I always felt I can't orgasm, and thus I'm going to have sex with someone, it's going to be really awkward, I'm not going to come, I don't know what to do, da da da. So I didn't really talk about it that much. But this specific dinner party, we were kind of, that period we were coming in and out of the pandemic and lockdown, so I was kind of glitching. Everyone was kind of glitching. And for whatever reason, we started talking about sex, and I didn't really know anyone at the dinner table that well. I thought, fuck it. Started talking about sex, and I was like, yeah, I can't orgasm, I'm not really a sexual person, I don't really like sex. And these two girls were sitting either side of me, and they both looked at me in horror, like, what? And I was like, yeah, it's not a big deal, like, don't worry, but yeah, I'm just not a sexual person. And as it transpired, they had both recently been to see a sex therapist separately, they're just friends, been to see a sex therapist called Alex Triculia, who was then based in Australia, and had become evangelicals for the cause. Little did I know, I was soon to become the most ardent, most kind of, zealous proselytizer of the benefits of sex therapy, but I didn't know that then. All I knew was I didn't like sex, and these two girls told me, you can fix that. You should go and see a sex therapist. I didn't even know sex therapy was a thing. I knew therapy, I'd kind of seen therapists here and there. They would say, how's your relationship to your mum, how's your relationship to your dad, blah, blah. But I didn't know you could really address your relationship to sex. But I left that dinner party with a number and a name, and they just said, listen, just call her, book an appointment, it will change your life. I thought about it, and I was like, I guess I don't think I want much to lose. I love a business incentive for everything. And I was doing some freelance writing at the time. I was running a live events business, which in the pandemic was a bit of an issue. And I was doing some freelance journalism for The Stack, which is an amazing women's media platform run by Charmaine Reed. And she was the editor at the time, and she said, you should go to sex therapy and you should write a column about it called Conversations with My Sex Therapist. It'd be fascinating. Love an incentive. I was like, fabulous. And yeah, I booked an appointment and I went to see Alex, I think like 2 weeks later. And the first thing I said to her, I remember this so clearly, I opened up my laptop, we did it over Zoom, opened up my laptop, thinking I'd say, I don't like sex, and she'd be like, okay, cool, masturbate, get a vibrator 5 times a week, whatever. And I'd be like, cool, great. It wasn't like that at all. But I remember the first thing I said to her was, I'm broken, I don't work, my body doesn't really work as it's meant to, and I don't think you're going to be able to fix me. And that was the beginning of my sex therapy journey. And it was, totally transformative.
Well, talk, please.
I realized I can talk for England, so I'm like, I'm going to give you a natural break in case there's anything.
You've got me intrigued.
Okay, fine.
And I want to know, the reason it's so fascinating is, first of all, thank you for being open to open up yourself in this way, and to also write a book about it and take us on this journey, because there's so many people, especially women, who may think this way, that they're broken and there's nothing you can do. So walk us into this point where it all started for you. You really being at this point where like, hey, you can't fix me anyways, and you went in there in a way not even wanting to be fixed.
No, I didn't think I could be fixed. I didn't really want to be fixed. And can I also just say, that was 5 years ago. I cannot tell you how many women have said to me since, I'm broken, or a variation of since. But I thought I was so alone in that feeling, because the thing with any taboo topic like sex is that yes, I feel like we do talk culturally, yes, we talk about sex, sex is used in marketing, it's all, TV shows, whatever. But when it comes to actually like proper vulnerable conversations about sex, aka when it's not going well, when it's not super fun, when you have an issue around sex, an issue with your body, we don't talk about that. And I think it leaves a lot of people feeling alone. It's funny because we're like together, but alone in feeling really broken in our connection to this taboo topic. So yeah, I went into sex therapy. I didn't think she'd be able to fix me. And I was surprised. One of the first things we ended up speaking about was, I mean, it sounds very unsurprising now, but it was about my relationship to my body. And I grew up like so many young women with an eating disorder. So from age 12-ish, I developed an eating disorder that became like full-blown anorexia when I was like 13, 14, 15. And I think at that point, I went to an all-girls school. Eating disorders were so rife. They remain, I know they're so commonplace today amongst young women and increasingly young men too. But it created this rupture between me and my body because my body was public enemy number one. I was at war with my body. I hated my body. I grew up in, the early noughties when, tabloid magazines were just covered with imagery of women with red circles around their thighs, like pointing out the cellulite. Celebrities were either like too fat, too thin. It was like size zero culture. And the kind of constant messaging was, if you're a woman, you need to be thin. You need to shrink yourself to be successful. And so I had really internalized this messaging, and then being in an all-girls school where that sort of eating disorders, as I said, were so rife. So I think from a very young age, I had a fundamental disconnect with my body. And I got physically better at about kind of 15-ish, by which I mean I didn't die. So doctors said to my parents, like, if she doesn't eat, she will die. I was so thin. I didn't die. I got physically better. But as anyone who's experienced an eating disorder knows, the kind of nugget of the mental illness that it stays with you. I think particularly back then, I don't think we really knew how to treat eating disorders as a mental health issue. I was treated as though I had a illness in my body. I was like put on a scale, was given a diet plan, but there was no attendance to the mental health element of it, which is obviously the absolute backbone of the illness. So that had kind of stayed in the background of my head, and I'd continued to be pretty bulimic, kind of for the ensuing years. And it was one of those things whereby I think this sounds awful to say, but anorexia is kind of glamorized in our culture. I think even now with the return of heroin chic, there is still glamorization of people being very thin. And that was, more acceptable, I think, to talk about. Whereas bulimia was messy and gross. So I never wanted to like admit to still having this, like in the shadows of my life, having this thing that kind of haunted me. It was messy and gross. There was kind of a grotesqueness to that. And so I didn't really talk about it. And I think I was also kind of in denial because it didn't run my whole life, but it was ever present. It was just whenever I was on my own, I had a really just self-abusive relationship in that time on my own really meant time cooking and being sick. And so I got to the therapy room, and the pandemic, for anyone who's had a mental health issue, the pandemic was obviously a really tricky time because suddenly you had all this time on your own, the world shut down. So the bulimia had got quite bad in the pandemic. But again, I didn't acknowledge it. It was kind of, I always talked about my eating disorder as this thing in the past. It was always this thing that happened in my teenage years that was like, very much a kind of a capsule pocket of time that I was very far beyond. But so I started talking to Alex, and one of the first things she addressed was, what's your relationship like to your body? And it was kind of one of the first time I think I told anyone other than maybe my mum, well, actually, like, it's not a big deal at all. Like, it's not huge, but I'm kind of, sometimes make myself sick. And I ended up kind of talking to her a lot about it. And she said something to me, and I'd seen a few therapists about it in my adult years, and I'd never found it particularly helpful. Again, it was a lot of like delving into parental relationships, which has its value. For me, it just wasn't very helpful. Alex said something to me that shifted my mindset around my in perpetuity and then around sex. And she said, Emma, for as long as you are at war with your body, you will struggle to enjoy sex. You will struggle to enjoy sexual pleasure. And it was the first time I was able to I was able to see my connection to my body for what it was, for having this ripple effect on the rest of my life. It wasn't just this thing that happened in the shadows that I could kind of tuck away, that could be in this corner of my world that didn't, it seeped into everything. It was affecting how I showed up in the world day to day. And fundamentally, it was affecting how I was, experienced my body, of course, then in sex. And so it was that kind of was probably the catalyst for getting me to think really critically for the first time in those adult years of, God, what am I doing to myself? What am I doing to my body by living with this private war that, that rages within me, and this kind of private shame? And I think I'd seen my connection to sex and my connection to my body, the kind of ongoing eating disorder, as these kind of twin pillars of shame that I didn't really talk about, my like dirty little secrets that I just kept to the side and didn't acknowledge. But you can't keep these things in the cupboard forever. They do seep out. And so over the course of our sessions together, we talked a lot about my relationship to my body and how you kind of reconnect your body. And a lot of it was around, it wasn't, yes, some of it was go masturbate and learn to seduce yourself. But a lot of it was around like, how do you like care for yourself? How do you look after your body? Like what is the relationship you have to yourself? I think now, we talk a lot about self-care and it gets wrapped up in, buy this product, this cream will, is a core element of your self-care routine. And for me, that wasn't what self-care looked like. Self-care was being able to come home and have an evening with no plans and be able to cook myself dinner and read a book and not like abuse myself, not go make myself sick, but actually be at kind of peace with my body. And so I think over that period of time, I learned to care for myself in a way I had never done previously. And part of that, of course, it's sex therapy, had a sexual element to it. So one of the things Alex told me was, you need to learn to seduce yourself. You need to learn to, and this is part of the like caring. Like you don't have to wait for someone you're dating to come along and show you a great time. You need to learn to romance yourself. Like take a long hot bath. And by the way, I never took baths growing up because I hated how my body looked in baths. So I never took baths. Just like run a hot bath, get a amazing dildo vibrator, whatever you want to use, put on nice music, like properly seduce yourself as if you were on a hot date, and like learn what that feels like to really give your body pleasure. So over this period of time, I think we had sessions that ran over a couple months, maybe up to 6 months. I really, for the first time, I stopped making myself sick. I started to masturbate more and was able to orgasm when I masturbated. It was just not something I really did before that much. It was not something I prioritized in terms of timing. And I wrote about it in this column, Conversations with My Sex Therapist. And I remember the first column came out, I was inundated with messages from women saying, the first column, sorry, was articulating how my connection to my body and the remnants of this eating disorder, or the presence of this eating disorder rather, were affecting my connection to sex and were a contributing factor to what was I then understood as sexual dysfunction. So not being able to orgasm in partnered sex, down to anxiety, body image issues. It's a really common issue amongst women particularly, but people generally. And I had so many women message me and say, I have this too. I've never acknowledged this, but I have an eating disorder, or I have an issue with my body, and I'm not able to orgasm, or I have an issue with my body. An issue with sex. And I think at that point, something just clicked. And I was like, first of all, I'm not alone. This is actually way more commonplace than I realized. And second of all, this is something that I can actually begin to heal and I can work on. And that was so unbelievably liberating. And it was like the first time I felt like I began to step into my body and inhabit my body in a way that felt peaceful. We talk a lot about body positivity now, and for me, I don't know that I'm ever gonna be like super body positive, because some days I'll be like, I love my body, but a lot of days I have that critic in my head is so deeply entrenched. I think body positivity can put a lot of pressure on us to feel like we need to constantly be loving our body. For me, a big thing was just body neutrality. Don't stand in front of myself in the mirror or look at myself in a bath or in bed or wherever and critique every part of my body. Just make peace with it. And I think making peace with my body was the first step to healing my relationship to sex, and my first step really on my journey to discovering a much deeper, more profound relationship to pleasure.
That is profound. Already in regards to that, you said that connection, how even though the conversation we're having is about sex, but you connected it, the importance of your relationship with your body first. So it's not even about the partner many times, it's you are the main partner in your life.
Totally.
And before we kind of move on, I would love for you to, if you go back in time, knowing what you know now, what would you tell Emma back then or anybody else like you before in terms of to help them overcome, whether it be eating disorder or as well get on this track of having this better relationship to, as you said, to not abuse yourself?
It's a good question. What would I tell myself? I think the most important thing for me was realizing that I wasn't alone in it. Because I think when you feel like you're alone in whatever you're going through, that sense of isolation breeds shame. And shame in itself is pretty silencing. I think it's Brené Brown talks about shame being the kind of greatest inhibitor to change. When we feel shame around something, it's really hard to engender change in that pocket of ourselves or our lives. So I think I would just go back and I would say to myself or to anyone who now or then was going through something similar, you're not alone in this. So you can just remove that first top layer of shame that comes from the perception of feeling like you're uniquely broken in what you're going through. And I think in that also then permits you to seek help and have a conversation. And one of the things I would say about, like, for me, sex therapy was so transformative because it got me talking about sex. It wasn't that it wasn't that hard in the sense that I think I had sex therapist once described our relationship to sex or capacity to talk about sex being akin to a muscle. So it's like we're muscle. The more you talk about sex, the stronger that muscle gets. I had grown up flabby and weak. I never talked about sex, so it felt very uncomfortable articulating anything as it pertained to intimacy. But there was just something about showing up week after week, both in the therapy room and then in this column and obviously my work thereafter, which we can get to, but just talking about sex and removing that inhibition that had always surrounded this topic. And I think once you can begin talking about something, you've kind of named the thing, you've named the elephant in the room, and you can then begin to understand your connection to it. You can begin to talk to other people and get other people's perspectives. And as soon as I began to talk to people around me about sex, because obviously I was emboldened by these conversations with Alex, and then I began to tell people around me, like, I'm actually in sex therapy. It's actually kind of amazing. So many people, friends who I've known for ages, who I'd never spoken particularly openly about sex before, were like, oh, I actually have that too. I have an issue with that. Guys and girls, both, everyone around me. And I think it was so revealing. I was like, oh, like, give people the space and permission to talk about this. And a lot of people have quite similar experiences and want to talk about it. I just want to really briefly pick up on something you mentioned before with regards to it being not about a partner always. It's actually about your relationship to yourself first and foremost. A lot of people, when I first started doing sex therapy, said to me, Emma, you can't do sex therapy. You're single. You're not having sex. And I was like, you don't say. I didn't realize. I thought my bed was, occupied. No. It was the best thing doing it on my own because, to your point, it was kind of, sorry to sound cliche, but it was a kind of journey I needed to go on by myself. You can totally do sex therapy and, repair a relationship to sex in a partnership. Of course you can. But I think for me, a lot of the issues that I had built up over the years, and they were ones I just had to deal with on my own. And sex isn't just a partnered activity. For me, your connection to sex, to your sexuality, is about your connection to your body. It's about how you inhabit your body day to day. I've recently started, I'm jumping around, I've just started my training to become a sex and relationship coach and sexologist. And when the book comes out, I'll be qualified as a sexologist, which I just thought was such a great start to the book journey. But one of the things that we talked about in the first session was the eroticism and the erotic. And I think colloquially, the term erotic is used to mean like sex, fucking, like he's erotic, she's erotic, you think he's sexual. But eroticism, Esther Perel talks about this in her book, Mating in Captivity. Eroticism is like life force. It's like an energy. It's like a kind of the wellspring of creativity and just kind of, yeah, creativity and power we have within us. It's how we connect to our body. It's how we connect to, how we create, how we enjoy. Audre Lorde has an amazing essay, Use of the Erotic, in which she talks about the erotic in terms of this capacity to really fully experience things and to feel enjoyment in things. Like, that's eroticism. That's not having sex with someone. Sometimes it is, and obviously sex can be incredibly erotic, but there is an erotic energy and power in all of us. And I think for me, being able to reconnect to my body was, now I can understand it, was being able to tap into this innate eroticism and kind of find my way back to myself through finding my way back to my body. And the ripple effect was huge. It was so transformative, and it was because of that I thought, God, if this can be so transformative to me, surely it can be just as transformative to other people. And that's why I set up an event series, we'll talk about it momentarily, but called Sex Talks, and I started hosting interviews and talks because I wanted to bring everyone and anyone into the sex therapy room with me. I wanted everyone to have access to these conversations and insights because I felt, our broader cultural conversation around sex is just so impoverished. And I thought everyone deserves to go on this journey. And I didn't even know about sex therapy before. So I've just become this kind of evangelical for the cause now.
I believe you're the best spokesperson for this movement that is just beginning for you. Yeah. You've been on this journey for a few years as you've gone on this transformation. However, with the launch of your book next year, I believe it's going to be very exciting because what I love about yourself is that how passionate you are about this subject. And I feel it. I think we all feel it. And to be able to inspire people, especially women, to open up and go on this journey, it will truly heal the world. And this is why this is an intelligent change conversation. Because a lot of times, I'm sure when people start listening to this, they're like, why are we talking about sex on intelligent change? But this is the same reason why sex and intimacy and relationships was a huge part of the Intelligent Change Summit that we put together. Because, as you said, it's a taboo that many of us kind of, we don't talk about it or we make fun of it. However, we all come from sex. And primarily life is sex. That's how life is created, is through that act. The reason also, I believe, the pleasures that we receive in life, whether that is eating, an amazing fresh fruit in season, and it tastes so pleasurable just to have those juices kind of in your mouth. The reason life has given those signals of pleasure, because you're providing yourself nutrition and you're feeding yourself and you're allowing that life force to live. And I believe the same thing is with intimacy and sex. The reason it is pleasurable is obviously to help us procreate and help us, but at the same time, with that pleasure aspect, we are these animals which have been given this gift to be able to receive so much pleasure from this act and explore if we have that awareness. So please then take us through, obviously I think at the core, which is really beautiful, you said, beyond the actual sex act or the partners or the sex toys or anything else, is first start with yourself. First start with your relationship with your body and how important that foundation is. Because without that, you can be trying all those other things and they're not going to work. However, like you said, you did that first foundation with that relationship with your body. Then take us on the next steps in your journey of actually you then being more in touch of receiving and having more pleasure in your life. Because then, like I said, you didn't remain single forever. So
no, I just get a boyfriend, which is kind of a shock to the world, I think, because I've been this I'd been single, running sex for ages. It's really interesting actually. So I've written a lot about this in the book. The book is memoir, and it's a lot of it is delving into this kind of period in time, in which I think I think looking back, it's kind of easy to be like, Oh, it was this very clear linear trajectory whereby I went to sex therapy, got my orgasm back, and it was just, smooth sailing from that. Obviously, it wasn't anything like that at all. And it involved, dating a sex addict, getting into like really problematic relationships. I think what it gave me first and foremost was suddenly I had this newfound connection to my body and to pleasure. So the first time I remember, I had a one night stand in like a few months after doing sex therapy, and he made me come, and I was like, oh! And literally he was like, and I was like, you messed up my sex column, because the column was about not being able to orgasm, and I was like, oh, you felt my column, and he was like, huh? And I was like, oh, don't worry, it's fine, it's fine. But I was like, oh my god, I can do this, like this, I can do this. This is amazing. And I remember like leaving and having like a real skip in my step, like, oh my god, I'm not broken. I mean, I'd kind of like, I'd moved away from the narrative of brokenness, but I was still, that was a big thing. Just to know that my body could do this thing and that I could feel so good in sex. But then I had to sit back and be like, well, what does a sexually liberated woman look like today?
Mhm.
What does it mean for me to be a sexual person in my late 20s, fresh out of sex therapy, liking sex, liking, being at peace with my body? What does this look like in the world? So I started dating kind of ferociously, like, re-downloaded the apps. I think I dated a bit before, but it was also coming out of the pandemic, so the timings were all kind of quite wild. And it was really a kind of extended period of time of figuring out what kind of sex I liked and who I wanted to be sexually, because we all have sex means something different to all of us, and our the legacy of the sexual revolution is that as women we can sex doesn't have to mean marriage or children, but I think sometimes the legacy of sexual like liberation and today's kind of hookup culture means that I think there can be a lot of pressure on everyone to feel like sex never means anything, and that it's you can just have sex with as many people as you want and it's meaningless. That's great. Some people love to be able to have totally casual just pleasurable sex. Fabulous, like, great. I wanted to know if I was that kind of person, so I started having more sex. Turns out I wasn't. I do have I think I really love, it sounds like kind of corny, but I love having sex kind of for love. I love the intimacy and the connection that sex facilitates in a partnership. But obviously I didn't have that at the time, so I was like, well, just gotta keep on trying. So it really felt like, I spent like a couple years really trying to figure out, what relationship sex I really, really wanted to have. And it was at the time I was running Sex Talks. So I set up this platform called Sex Talks, which the live event series where I interviewed people who worked in the sex and wellness and pleasure space. Like across the board, I've interviewed from porn performers to sex therapists to authors who write about sex to dating experts, like a whole range of different people. And I wanted to do them as live events because I felt it was really important for people to sit in a room together, shoulder to shoulder, at least listening to a conversation about sex. Because for me, I felt that was such an important way of dismantling the shame that we so often synonymize with this topic. But it was funny because I think in that process, because I was running Sex Talks, because I was having this conversation around sex, I became like, I had a column in ES magazine, a sex column for a while. I felt a lot of pressure to also create great sex stories, to like go on a wild date and then be able to report back and like bring another anecdote, which was really fun for a while. Like, I once on like a first date to Lisbon on a 3-day road trip with a guy, and yeah, it was kind of wild, basically a stranger, took acid, terrible sex, like, but not that fun, and like, but great story. Really did it for the plot. Like, I went ham on the plot. Because then I got to report back and like, Sex Talks, the sex talk community is like amazing, mainly women. We'd come together, people would share their like horror dating stories. But I think over time, I think, especially, I'm 33 now, I think at a certain point, doing it for plot stopped feeling so compelling an idea. The plot kind of hurt. The plot required me kind of leaving a bit of myself at the door and chasing the story. And I think I got a little bit more, self-protective and realized, I think also, after a couple of years, really probing what my connection to sex looked like and what I wanted from it. I guess I began to want something maybe deeper in with my connection to sex, with the relationships I fostered. And again, not that it's this like clear linear narrative at all. There were so many ups and downs, but I met my now partner just over a year ago. And it's been really interesting being in a relationship with all this, like with all these learnings, and actually just kind of applying a lot of the stuff that I've learned through sex talks and learned through therapy and, you know, now learning on my current course, to actually being in a consistent relationship with someone who, you know, we do have to talk about sex, and we do have to talk about responsive desire versus spontaneous desire. We do have to talk about, like, you know, we live together now. So what does it look like to maintain sexual currency in the context? It's kind of quite, he's kind of almost like case study. It's a case study of everything I've learned. But it's amazing. You know, even this morning we had a conversation about, I've been really stressed with the book. Obviously, stress is a massive inhibitor to sex. But I'm able to have conversations now with a partner that aren't couched in shame, that I don't feel kind of guilty about, being like, hey, so this is how I'm feeling about sex. This is what I would really love us to try, you know, to ensure that we're, you know, having the kind of sex that I know that we want. And I had to catch myself being like, fuck, these are the conversations I could never in my wildest dreams have imagined having with a partner around intimacy. And, you know, I think people sometimes think, you know, talking about sex is unsexy, or like, you know, people say talking about, you know, consent, planning sex is unsexy. It's so hard. It's the best way to have good sex, is to actually have a really open dialogue with the people you're having sex with. But to actually be able to, yeah, apply these skills, I guess, in the context of a relationship has been a real learning curve, I guess. I feel like it's like applied science, applying the science, which is quite fun.
I think it's a wonderful journey. Most importantly, as you said, in the current culture, that is changing. And I'm curious of your thoughts on it, especially you may have more data when it comes to this. The shallow culture of dating and just having sex for the point of sex, at some point, as you said, it gets kind of boring. At least maybe to some,
Some
maybe
people,
to
yeah.
for myself. Like I said, I've been in a, you know, I've been married for most of my life. I got married very young when I proposed when I was 21, in a relationship since I was 19 with the same person for 16 years. And recently we separated, as you know, in the last kind of 2 years, and I had my little gap year of exploration, right? Where I was like, okay, let's.
You sexually as an adult, yeah, you don't know.
And I don't know. And obviously, the big thing that broke our marriage, right, was really that sexual desire for my partner, where she's like, she didn't feel it. And this is where I feel the conversation around sex and desire is so important. And especially for women, of whether it be you're in a relationship or you're not in a relationship, of being able to also, as you said, openly speak about sex to your partner.
Yeah.
And also the importance, even as you said, all the exploration that you've done yourself, even though a lot of maybe mistakes or bad experiences they may have, they all were important to lead you to have this more healthy relationship with your partner now. And sometimes this exploration, many people don't do that exploration. They kind of stop themselves and they're waiting just for that, like the love in their life. Where, as you said yourself, like exercising that muscle of sex or putting the reps, even though it may be a little not natural feeling at first. However, having that experience of knowing, oh, you know, I really don't like this. Let's say I also had a one night stand, and it was my first one, right? And it was also, yeah, it was, but it was, for me, it was like it was bad,
Yeah.
right? Where,
Again.
you know, it was. I'm like, oh, it seems like a dream, right, for a guy. Like, hey, this is so easy, and things like that. And you know, you're very open. I'll be very open. It was the first time like I couldn't get it up, and I was like, what the hell? Like, this is weird that this is not functioning. But there's something about maybe the desire, and it all worked. But there was this moment where, like, what? Why is this not functioning? Am I broken? So, but having those experiences of being like, oh, actually, like this transactional sex, like one night stands, like that was, I did not enjoy that. I don't want to chase that. And also then learning that, similar to you, deep connected sex with a person that you love is so much more special than just having a quantity of incredible, beautiful women at my disposal. Like for me, I've learned it's better to just be in love and deepen that relationship and have those conversations, which allows you to have, for me, it's like a way more nourished meal versus just having fast food. However, that was on my learning and my experience. So I'm curious with yourself, really moving to this topic really of love. So as you said, there's also this pressure, I think, in our society about finding the one or finding love, and and with this pressure in our society, it becomes this elusive thing because it seems like, back in the day, without apps, being in a small town, somehow everyone was able to still get married and live a long life together in a partnership. And now we have what we think about is this knowledge, information, wisdom, this optionality of so many people, yet there's now more single people than ever. So what is your learning about? I know it's still early for you, but even just about, I'm sure you thought a lot and read about this idea of love and the role it plays in our lives.
Totally. I think that there's so many different things here. I want to touch on so many, but I'll try and keep it kind of concise and to the point. I think I think there is, what a privilege to live in a time in which, I mean, particularly for women, we don't have to marry someone we're not economically dependent on finding someone in order to live, in order to actually be able to have I mean, I was recently on a panel discussing the legacy of Jane Austen and, deep diving back into her world. And you think that, it wasn't that long ago where women's only hope, if you didn't come from a super wealthy family, and even then, your prospects depended on finding a man. Like, they are very, very limited up. You couldn't have a bank account. You couldn't have your own career. Like, I mean, Jane Austen didn't even write under her own name. And I think, even it was, well, Jane Austen was 250 years ago now. Like, that's not that long ago. And, you just look at how narrow women's options were. And marriage was really like, that's all you had. So I had to kind of constantly remind myself, we're so lucky to live in an age in which we have the option. You can be on your own and have an incredible life, and you can build your own career, have incredible friends, become your family. So I think that's something that I would never take for granted, and I think is a huge, huge privilege. And I do think sometimes when we look at the stats of research suggesting that people are single now more than ever before, I can't think of that like good, because I think often historically people were together not because they loved each other or because they wanted to be together. Of course people did, and of course there were wonderful marriages as there are now, but there are a lot of people who probably together just out of economic necessity because they kind of had to be. And a woman's options to leave also, they couldn't really. If you're economically dependent on someone, you can't just leave them. So I look at that, I don't see that as a negative thing necessarily. I do think what is interesting now is that in the era of app dating, we do have this perception of infinite optionality. And I often think to myself, why would you ever stop swiping if you're always one swipe away from perfect? That is an incredibly tantalizing notion, that the world of eligible single people is at your fingertips. So the person in front of you right now, yeah, they seem great. They seem nice. They seem cool. You like their t-shirt. But you know what? You might be able to find someone who has a tiny bit more in common with you. Or you might be able to find someone whose job actually matches your idea of what the ideal job is for your partner. I think this idea that there is this kind of perfect that we have this perceptive access to, I do think that is dangerous, because I do think a lot love and finding someone, if what you want is partnership. And I think what is amazing now with the kind of broadening out of this conversation around love and romance is, I don't think monogamous relationships work for everyone. I think there are a lot of people for whom that style of relationship doesn't work for them. And I think it's incredible that you can now have a much more open conversation about what you want and think critically about, well, what do I want from love? What do I want from a relationship? And I feel like for me, the past 5 years have really forced me to question everything. I've done loads of interviews, like, amazing Anna Karoba, who runs Field App, and done loads of conversations around ethical non-monogamy. Forced myself, I guess, to critically question my baked-in assumption that I would grow up one day, get married, have 2.5 kids, have a car, a house, da, 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 da. I had to think critically. I was like, well, do I want that? What do I want from a relationship? I've come back to monogamy is what suits me. I really value having a partner. I think, again, that is the relationship style that works for me. It doesn't work for a lot of people. I think I feel like it's a privilege being able to pick that consciously. And I also think I feel lucky again at this age, at 33, having gone through, having all these learnings, dated a ton, explored sexually, felt broken, been on this journey towards pleasure, being able to then at 33 be like, oh, you know what, I really do want, I met my partner over a year ago in the gym, so not even on that. And I feel at this stage of my life, I'm in the headspace to be able to recognize, like, one, I really like this relationship setup. It works for me in this partnership where I think we're both able to be one another's best support system. But with that, I'm also the romantic fallacy, our absolute, starry-eyed, Disneyfied notion of love is like you find love, you fall in love, and it's just so amazing, and it's just that's it. That's find the person's the easy bit, and then the rest of it. No, like I recognize, like, love is, as Esther Perel says, love is a verb, love is an action. You have to pick to love your partner every day, and it takes so much work. Like, there's so many difficult conversations. Like, I mean, I've been writing a book about the history about my sex life. That's hard for my partner, who's like having to hear me tell all my stories constantly. He's like, oh, whoa, okay, wow, did you need to say that? And I'm like, sorry. And I think it's been an amazing learning again, or it's a reminder, yeah, of like love is an action. It's choosing every day to have the wonderful conversations, the joy and the care, and then to have the hard conversations, to set your boundaries, to go up against your boundaries and realize it was a boundary and it didn't feel comfortable and have to come back from that, and then have that conversation with a partner, to have amazing, incredible, wild sex, and then go through periods where you're too stressed and too tired to have sex, and suddenly you feel like, oh, am I broken again? Was my desire gone? And then be able to have a conversation about that. So I think my personal perception of love has evolved so much over the years and has moved so fundamentally away from that kind of Disney idea of, you find the one and that's it and it's all great and rosy, to, I think, probably a much more realistic view of love, which is that it can be the most wonderful, it is the most wonderful thing. And it is the most incredible feeling to fall in love. But I think I've also fallen in love, I mean, sounds a bit corny, but with like my friends as well. I'd say my like first great love was my university boyfriend, who was wonderful, and I was the first time I was really taught what it means to love and be loved in return in a romantic context was through him, and it was wonderful. And then my next love of my life is my best friend, who's still my best friend today, Elspeth, who I met in my latter half of my 20s, who was with me in this whole journey of sex therapy and this kind of phase of discovery, Saturn's return. We did it all together. We lived together. We had the most incredible time, and she'll be in my life. We will be in each other's lives forever. I really take that as a great life romance. And now, I'm in this, find my second great, intimate romance of a sexual kind, as if I don't have sex. It's not literal. With my now partner, and I love him. He's amazing. We talk about long term, but also I don't believe in the one. I don't believe there's one person on this planet that you find and then you click together. I don't believe in the Platonian other half. I think there's loads of people that you can potentially work with, but it is a gap bound. I think it's meeting someone and then deciding, okay, cool, I like you enough and I like this enough to want to show up every day through the highs and the lows, when it's hard, when it's easy, all the bits. I take all of it. So I think, yeah, does that answer your question? That was a very kind of roundabout way of talking about love, but I think to round that up, my view growing up of love was very informed by Disney and The One, and my view of love now is very different and a lot more, I think, rounded and complex and nuanced. And I think it's still a very worthwhile thing to want. I think it's become very uncool to want love, because,
Really?
well, in the sense that I think it's, and I was definitely a part of this, with sex talks, and I said this, I dating is hard. Dating's really difficult, I think. It's, it can be really hurtful. It can bring up a lot of traumas. It can be a lot of unresolved issues, people. If you go through a string of, as I have so many times, of being rejected by people, it's really painful. It knocks your confidence. It can be tough. And And I think that there's a bit of a narrative now, and I think a very much needed one, of you don't have to find someone to have a happy life. There are many ways to design a wonderful life, but finding a partner isn't, just the only route. But I think it's important to be able to recognize that it's still a wonderful thing to have and to hold and to cherish. But it does take a ton of work.
I want to have a conversation with you about this idea, as you said, of making that choice. What I see, and I remember I made this like video and reel when I first became single, because when you're in a relationship, especially marriage, and when I was in it, I'm not looking elsewhere. I'm in it.
Yeah.
And for the being out of it for the first time, then you start looking, right? I think there's still something in us as humans to want to find our other half and want to be with somebody else. And as I started exploring, well, my first realization was there's a lot of people that are very hurt. And the way, especially I would say in the 30s.
I think it's when you've been around the block and you're like, oh God, the rejections have been brutal by that point. You've had some terrible dates.
Yeah, so there's a lot, there's some broken love stories, broken hearts, and the way people I saw would approach dating is with a lot of boundaries, a lot of shields. They're trying to protect themselves. And the thing with love is, it's not something you can protect yourself from if you want to experience it. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be open. So I'm curious, that's why to have this conversation with you, is that my, because I'm very fortunate to now be in a loving relationship right now. And even for me, going into falling in love again and entering another relationship, I found myself then in that place because I was hurt, and then my hurt would be coming up, and I would want to run away because I don't want to show up vulnerable. I don't want to be rejected. And so, but please chime in on what the thought you had on this.
So just 2 points to pick up. First thing I will say, just really quickly to go back, I don't think that finding love is about finding your other half. I think that actually I feel quite strongly about this, because I think that the Disneyfied notion of love that I think a lot of us grow up with is this idea of finding the other half, or plutonian other half that completes us, which suggests that we're half on our own. And I think for me, what it's been, I think, very important, a very important shift in my mindset to realize I was never a half looking to be whole. I was whole and had a very fulfilling and built a very fulfilling, wonderful life, which I think is why I can love from a position of abundance now in my current relationship. Because I think for a lot of time, especially in the latter half of my 20s, I was dating from a place of lack, of like still trying to figure out my connection to sex, still, issues around, just working through a lot of stuff. But I think for dating, hoping to find someone who would fix me and who would complete me and who would tell me who I was supposed to be in life. I was on this amazing journey with my connection to sex, but it was part of a bigger journey of also just going through a latter half of your 20s and trying to figure out who you are. And I think for a lot of time I was dating, hoping that someone else could tell me who I was, show me who I was, could love me into loving myself. And I think, sounds cliche, but I think you just have to do that stuff. I think it's really powerful to be able to do that stuff on your own. I think other people can definitely help you, and I think that you discover new facets of yourself within the context of a romantic relationship and also in your platonic relationships too. But I definitely think that considering yourself whole and your life full on your own is a really important thing, to be able to go into a relationship with an abundant mindset, that you're bringing a lot to the table and you're expecting a lot to be brought to the table, as opposed to trying to kind of fill in lack. So that's more of a kind of semantic thing, but I think it's an important point to address. I think when it comes to the vulnerability point, I think it's a really, really, really good point and an important one. And I really struggled with the vulnerability piece for a while. I talk loads and I'm very open. Once I'd done sex therapy, one of the main things I was thinking about a lot of the time is sex and running sex talks. My conversations with people on dates tended to be pretty open pretty fast. I'd say most conversations with people I have are pretty open pretty fast because of what I do and say and think about, and I don't really have a filter. which I'm trying to cultivate a bit of a filter about. It's not really worked so far. And so I kind of felt like I'd go in really open, but then kind of pull myself back, wanting to be self-protective. And I remember once, I think a friend, I think I was trying to, I started dating, and by started, I mean, I was on date number like 2, I think, 2 or 3. I would date in a very self-protective way of just like, I don't give a shit. I would refuse to like leave my local area and make everyone come to me. I was just like, if I don't care, if I pretend I don't care, then this can't hurt me. So I was so defensive in the way I dated, and I just and I would kind of show up in a little bit of a half-hearted way of like, kind of being quite casual about it, like not really making an effort for a bit because I'd been hurt, as everyone does and has, and I kind of felt if I don't care, then then I'm safe. And I think I then tried to kind of swing the other way because I realized I was like, okay, maybe this isn't the best way to date if you're kind of being quite standoffish and like a bit of a dick. Maybe go in with being more vulnerable. But I think someone needs to earn your trust and earn your vulnerability. I don't think that we should just go into dating like, I just need to be really open and really vulnerable, because you're essentially meeting strangers. And I think we give people, especially when we're in a position in our life where we're very hopeful about love and we're looking for love, if that is what we're looking for, again, it doesn't have to be, but if that's what you're looking for, I think we can end up giving a lot of power to the people that we date, because with every person you meet, you're hoping that they have this future together that you can kind of imagine in your mind's eye. And that's why I often think that actually when you've been dating someone for a little bit, like a kind of short-term thing, I think the endings of those things can sometimes be the most painful, because you put all this hope in their basket and you didn't really know them well enough or long enough to have your expectations brought down a notch by the reality of them and the situation. So and if it ends then prematurely, you're just left with the perception that you've just lost the hope of this future, this like romantic future you imagined together. But so on the vulnerability front, I think I've kind of come to the conclusion now that people need to earn your vulnerability, just like they need to earn your vulnerability and you need to earn theirs. I think going in with clear boundaries at the beginning, hopeful but boundaried and clear with your time and your energy. So not going to dating thinking I'm just going to give people all my time, like, oh, they want to do, it's so fun when someone's like, oh, let's just meet up again, and you get swept away and you're like, oh, this is so fun, this is so romantic, and actually you're just really letting the stranger into your intimate space. I don't just mean sex, I mean just your intimate world very quickly. Have they really earned your trust enough to deserve that? And what if then in 2 weeks' time they just up and leave because you didn't really know them that well, and you opened up so much and you were so wonderfully vulnerable and they've just really hurt you? To me, I don't think that's that desirable or that sensible strategic way to date. I think let people earn your vulnerability and give it to the people over time, in the way that I think it works both ways. But I think there is definitely a balance to be struck between boundaries and vulnerability. But I definitely think early on, I think boundaries are incredibly important.
And do you believe in love at first sight?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
My parents have been together for I think 35, 40, so many years, many, many decades. Okay, they are so in love. They are they're a wonderful example of long enduring love, and also fucking showing up, and seriously, my mum's a saint, and my dad's crazy and wonderful. He's fabulous. But my mum has always said she fell in love with my dad at first sight because she saw him across the room at this party, and that was it. She knew from the moment she saw him. And I'm like, Mum, you thought he was fit, and then you met him and you liked him. I think we just love at first sight. You find someone hot, there's a first layer of attraction. Then you talk, you like their voice, I don't think it's I don't believe in predestination or
Really?
not at all. No.
What about soul level love and destiny, all this stuff?
No, I don't believe in that. The reason I'm a bit cynical about all this stuff is I think that it fuels that Disney Prince Charming narrative around love, which I actually just think trips us up and isn't that helpful. Going back to what I said before about love being an action, I think when we believe in this idea of love at first sight, you just see someone from across the room and you fall in love and it's so nice. It's when you don't have that, when you don't fall in love immediately at first sight, because actually getting to know the person is what makes you love them. Or what about when you know, challenges come up in an early stage of relationship and you think, well, you know, if it was my soulmate, it would just be really easy. And then so you back off because they weren't perfect. So I think these things can trip us up more than they can help us. I think, you know, attraction is important. You know, there's loads of elements to attraction that obviously connect us to someone early on when we're in a kind of romantic relationship. But yeah, it takes work, and I think it takes effort. And those things aren't just as easy as like falling into it or like believing that destiny like brought you together. I just don't think it's very helpful.
Mm.
Do you think I sound cynical?
A little bit. And it's okay.
I am cynical.
But for me, I'm quite romantic.
Yeah, I know you are such a romantic. You believe in destiny, don't you?
Of course.
Yeah.
And especially, you know, the reason for my belief is obviously what I've gone through is quite a trip.
Yeah.
You know, I thought I would have happily ever after and a Disney story, and I lived it. I was in it, and it was amazing. Like, so I have, like, on my side, it was great.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, to the things that we spoke about before, there are these other things that in a relationship you have to be also vulnerable as you keep building the partnership. Is that if you want to be seen, you have to allow yourself to be seen. And many times, even if you deeply love somebody and you are open up to be sexually open with them and bring life together with them, and yet you are keeping things inside yourself that you're not sharing with your partner, at some point it's going to blow up. And I would say that was kind of my experience, that in a way there was part of me that was really hurt, and still was like, you know, can I trust another woman? Because me as a person, I'm fully open, fully loving, and I like I love deeply, and I love love, and I love everything. And in today's world, it's quite intense, even for women to be able to receive that kind of love. They say they want it, and then they get it, like, oh, like they also can run away, like. And that's why, like, some of my findings is like what women say they want and what they actually want is quite different. But in regards to this idea, and I want to get your thoughts on it as well, there's just certain things that have happened in my life where I'm like, it's kind of like I've haven't believed in destiny before, but certain encounters where I'm like, it feels destined. And at the same time, I don't believe that there's one destiny.
No.
There's multiple destinies that you can kind of ride and go into, and you have forks where you get to choose your destiny. Do you want to go on this path? However, once you go on this path, there's no going back. Like, it's kind of like flowing down a river, and then once the river splits, that's it. You're gonna flow into that direction. And so, for me, as some of experiences that I had in my life, where I'm able to see that, as even in your own journey that you've told us about, you sometimes have to take a certain path to get to where you are now, to allow you to grow in a certain way and expand in a way to be and become the person that you are now. And life will bring opportunities and people into your life that you will, again, you get to choose to accept if you want those people in your life.
And also if you're ready for it.
And if you're ready for it. And oftentimes, let's say meeting your soulmate, if you believe in that, right? Let's see that. And I don't think it's one soulmate. It can be many.
Loads of soulmates.
Yeah. But meeting that person, it will trigger you. It will force you to expand. And one of the things that I said, you know, in one of my kind of more popular reels is that love is not a checklist.
Mm.
And many times I feel the advice that we get even online or Instagram, say somebody like Jillian Turecki, like I love her. And however, sometimes when you listen to this advice, you may actually, uh, as you said, love is not so straightforward. Sometimes it's quite complicated. And this is where I feel your intuition and being in touch with your intuition and what feels right, even though it's complicated, and your friends and your family will be like, why would you be with this person? And a recent realization that I had is that's just part of it. And sometimes where you feel like, oh, that is so toxic, those people shouldn't be together, or your parents or whatever. But in fact, as you said, if they lasted 4 decades, in some ways, they were there in each other's lives for a reason. And they have that also polarity through this potential kind of not a complete mismatch. Because oftentimes I feel even between our friends, we call it like admin relationship decision. When we see is like, oh, she went into that relationship because it's just an admin choice. Like he's he's he checks the boxes and he feels right, and at the same time there isn't that life.
Yeah.
And we sometimes can, with our current society of seeking perfection, of seeking, and I have met a lot of girls who have the checklist. Love is not a checklist. And I think love is more of a verb, it's more of a feeling, it's more of an action.
And also a sense of responsibility.
A huge
And
responsibility.
I think that's what sometimes gets missed in the contemporary conversation around the kind of checklist notion of love. And I totally agree with that. There is a sentiment of, I think it's really important to know what you want, what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Because in anything in life, I mean, you know this, like if you don't have an idea roughly of the kind of, life you want to live and the person you want to be with, people you want to surround yourself with, then yeah, you're probably going to end up making some pretty crappy decisions because you're not being clear on what you want. That doesn't mean you have a checklist of like, and I think this is what dating apps do. I don't think they're all bad, by the way, but I do think that they promote a checklist relationship to dating because you are quite literally reducing people to, a couple photos, their height, their job, their name, a few prompts that are pretty random. I mean, you are reducing people to like, a very small, a very narrow collection of data points that we then, as you're swiping through an app, you're having to judge people by this small collection of data points. And I think, I know personally, it definitely made me in my, in my dating app days, like feel a bit superficial in what I was looking for because you don't have that much to go by, and you kind of end up creating pretty arbitrary markers of what you're looking for just to get through more swiping because there's so much swiping. So I think that going into dating, kind of knowing the kind of person you want to be with, the kind of company you want to keep, the kind of energy you want to feel is so important, but not reducing people to a list of things you then want to kind of tick off. But actually, because I also think that precludes you from really sitting with someone and like seeing how you really feel around them. How does someone make you feel? And how in turn do you make them feel? Not just in a kind of fall in love state, but how, like, energetically, how do you, like, I've been in dates with people before who have on paper they've been like my ideal guy. They've been someone I've like fancied so much, had a really good time with, had really interesting conversations with, but around them I felt so anxious. And I just had, like, I remember this one guy, I just felt it would take me days to get over our dates because I would be so anxious in the days after. And he didn't do anything specifically bad. Like, he's a great guy and he'd been an amazing boyfriend to someone else, I'm sure. But for me, there was something like we just weren't compatible. Like how he communicated, how we connected and communicated didn't really work for me. But because on paper I was like, but he's so great, he's so perfect, he's exactly the kind of person I imagined myself with, I totally ignored how I felt in his company and how I felt whilst dating him. So I think that's I agree with you entirely. I think it's a really good piece of advice. But on the responsibility thing, I think also when we focus so much on what we want from dating, on like the checklist, on like, do you know what you want to get? Like, are you getting everything you want? It's also, what are you giving? Like, what are you bringing to the table? Because love is a massive responsibility as well. And I feel this very, intensely now. I think both of my relationships, both of my romantic relationship and my platonic relationships have been really challenged during this book period. I've been so like so focused on the book. I've been so disconnected from everybody and from my normal life. I've been so focused. I've been like in the library loads, in this very like kind of work hole. I kind of love work holes, to be honest. But anyway,
The best.
the absolute best. Honestly, I just literally would just do it forever. But I think I've had to kind of come up against the reality that, you know, I can't just like dip in and out of relationships. There is a responsibility to being someone's best friend, to being someone's partner, to being someone's friend. There is a responsibility there. It's not one way. And I think it's really hard because, you know, we all live busy lives. Writing a book for me is like, you know, big, like it's like one of my biggest dreams. But love is responsibility. That doesn't mean I get to opt out from showing up in a loving way to the people around me. And I think that tenet of the conversation around love, I think, gets missed a lot today as we focus on the more kind of superficial elements of it and the kind of checklist approach to dating. We don't think enough about what is the responsibility? Like, are you ready for that responsibility? Do you want that responsibility? Like, because you know, you said before about you know, you've met people who they say they want X, Y, and Z, but actually they back away from it as soon as they have it. That's why I'm really critical of the like deified fallacy of, you know, the romantic fallacy, because I think it's an illusion that we think that we're just taught that that's what you should want. And if you don't engage with it critically, I think you can kind of just walk into things and be like, oh, no, this is what I want. And then the reality of it is very different to what you anticipated. And you're not ready for it. You're not emotionally ready for that responsibility. You don't want it. And that's fine. That's okay. You don't have to be. But like when you think, you need to like think critically about it before the thing so that you know, protect yourself, but also you protect other people.
Yeah, I think it's a major point. We can speak forever.
We
you
can.
know. And as we wrap up, I'd love for you to choose your own Get Closer question. So have you played this before?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so this is our Get Closer
Yeah.
game by Intelligent Change. There's 3 levels.
Yeah.
Closest, the spicy one.
Yeah.
Closer or just close?
Okay. Well, obviously I'm going to go for a spicy one.
I'll ask you.
Do you over? Okay.
All right. Oh, this is actually very relevant.
Oh, great. Okay.
And they're all sex related, so we'll see if you're open to it.
Okay.
When and with whom did you lose your virginity?
Oh, well.
You say you want a spicy one.
This is a Pandora's box. So, I don't believe in the notion of virginity. Virginity is another concept that we need to dismantle because I write about in the book. Part of the book is addressing the sex myths that I think have fucked us. There are many of them, hence why I could feel broken for not enjoying sex in a certain way. But amongst the many myths I've addressed in the book is the myth around virginity, because it is a very narrow view of sex. That virginity, when you ask me about when did I lose my virginity, obviously I think of when did I first have sex with a man. Obviously that's a very heteronormative view of sex. It's penis and vagina. It discounts all the sexual experiences that happened before there. And also it puts a kind of weird pressure, I think, on that specific experience as being this kind of like this deflowering, this moment you go from girl to woman, you graduate into this new sexual realm, and it just so isn't that. It was a fun, like the first time I had penetrative for sex, the boy in a band at like 16, and it was no more deflowering than, you know, getting undressed.
Mine sucked.
It was, I mean, it was like the most like anticlimactic thing ever, but I'd also had sexual experiences before then which I hadn't really considered because, you know, the virginity thing was such a big pressure. And yeah, I had no idea. It was this thing that because of virginity myth and all the stuff that's wrapped around that, I felt like it was this thing I needed to get rid of, because I went to an all-girls school. Everyone was having, you know, sexual experiences very young. I was pretty old to still have not had that specific sexual experience in a whole litany. And I felt like I needed to get rid of this thing. I needed to get rid of it because it was this like burden on me that marked me out as separate from my friends, as less mature, as less like sexually advanced. And then I did it and I was like, what the fuck was that?
I'm curious now with this perspective, which I think is really beautiful that you picked out that question. And
love a sex myth that we can bust.
Yeah. So in the future, if you would have a daughter, how would you educate her about her virginity, losing her virginity, approaching sex?
First thing I would say is do not feel pressure to do anything you don't want to do early on. No one else, it does not matter what other people around you think you should be doing or should have done sexually. They're not in the room. They don't live with those experiences. You do. And it's your relationship to your body that matters. And I think I would try and instill from a very young age a like respect and excitement around sexual connection, like that, sexual intimacy, whether whoever it's with, get rid of the notion of virginity. The sexual experiences you have, whether they're with men, women, non-binary people, whoever you have those with, are really exciting and wonderful opportunities for a deeper embodied connection. Like, make sure that you feel ready emotionally, spiritually, mentally, that you have a connection with that person, that you do want to go there with them in the kind of early stages of exploring. Don't feel rushed into it because of peer pressure.
Yeah.
And I think, I sound a bit, I get that it's, ideally in an ideal world, that's exactly what you say to your kids. But I think for me, when I think about what it would look like to have, I'd want to have conversations around intimacy and relationships very early on with prospective potential children, if I have them. From a very, very young age, just even like understanding your body, like consent around your body. You don't have to touch that person. You don't have to let that person kiss you. You don't have to let that person touch you. Really have autonomy over your body and learn to say no. And I think that would probably be the most powerful thing I would hope to be able to teach my children, is the power of no. No, you can just say no. You don't have to do that thing that that person wants you to do. You don't have to go home with that person. You don't have to do anything. You can just say no, and also no is enough. You don't need to elaborate. You don't need to give an explanation. You don't need to feel guilty. You don't need to explain to your friends. You can just say no. And there is so much power in that. So that is what I would tell her.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank
The
you.
last question I have for
Yeah.
you is, what are you grateful for?
What am I most grateful for? Honestly, I feel so unbelievably grateful that I've got to go on this totally unplanned, unexpected journey around sex. I never expected, when I was planning my dream career and future, in the newsroom, in politics and media, I never envisaged talking about sex. And for the first couple of years of sex talks, I didn't say this before, but I really struggled with it I was so passionate about it, but then I also still had probably residual shame and the kind of pressure and the taboo of the topic. And I felt, God, do I want to be the sex girl? Do I want to be, is this worthy of my time? Is this something, should I be going back to politics? And I'm so unbelievably grateful that I stuck with it, because what could be more important than the relationship we have with ourselves and how we connect to other people? You mentioned at the start that, if anyone was questioning why you would have this conversation on intelligent change, I think you articulated it so powerfully. What could be more important than this, than how we connect to ourselves, than how, conversations we have around, health and wellness? Sex is a fundamental part of that. Intimacy, eroticism, that life force that Audre Lorde talks about, that wellspring of creativity we have within us, the erotic, our ability to harness that, to enjoy it, to utilize that, that is the erotic. And that all comes under the umbrella of sexuality and intimacy. And I feel so unbelievably grateful that I get to deep dive into this topic in my professional life now. And, I said I'm trained to become a sexologist, and, I hope I continue talking and writing about this topic, because I feel like I've just turned like the first page, and it's a fucking good book. So is mine. So
It's your destiny.
okay, fine, Alex. Maybe I believe in destiny.
Emma, thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for
having
being
me.
on Intelligent Change, and it was such a wonderful conversation. This is probably one of my longer conversations. I wanted to keep it going.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love chatting to you. So thank you.